So, Jane Eyre, first five chapters. What do you think?
It was great. I think a little while ago I read like maybe the first 5 to 10, so it was a nice refresher. And I was able to, or since I wanted to or think of things extra deeply, so I know I would understand him. I had a better understanding of everything.
Got it. Are you looking up vocabulary words or just trying to figure them out from context?
Um, for now, I was just trying to figure him out, but when I like sit down and read it again, I wanted to look up some words. There were some longer words that I wasn't too sure about. I don't remember, but I
Yeah.
think I got everything in general.
Okay. Yeah, it is pretty sophisticated vocabulary, and I always encourage people to be word geeks. And I know it's if you're reading along, it takes time and so forth, but I would encourage you to, um, do you read it on a hard copy or a Kindle, or how are you reading it?
Right now I'm reading online on an online library.
Yeah. But yeah, just good idea. You can copy and paste words where you want to, geek out on them and so forth. But
Okay,
yeah. So one of the things this is famous for actually, and I checked up on this is one of the first major first person narratives. And so I assume you're
I did
familiar
notice
with,
that.
yeah, first person versus third person. Um,
Mhm.
are most of the books you read first person or third person in current terms of your recreational reading?
Um, I would say that it's pretty even, and I don't really know what chooses an author to go with either one, but I do know that I always mix up the persons, but I know that all the books that we've read together so far have been the opposite of Jane Eyre.
Right. So
So
third
it's
person is
interesting.
I. Just in grammar, first person is I, second person is you, third person is they. And so, right, everything else has been third person. And one of the things that, again, I was reading up a little bit on background, is that although Jane Austen writes in third person, we get some sense of what Emma and Elizabeth are thinking, even though it's third person. Does that sound accurate?
I think so, just like the way they write, kind of.
Maybe. I was trying to remember myself and I couldn't remember clearly, but for me at least, I would say Jane Eyre's first person, I feels much more immediate, and I would say therefore compelling and enjoyable. Um,
Yeah,
you would agree? Uh,
I agree. Yeah.
did you remember the fight scene when she gets in the fight right off the bat with her stepbrother?
Yes. Yeah. I remember.
Do you like such a feisty fighting character?
In Jane, yes, I do. And I was mad at the other kid because he was my age and she was my brother's age. So it's just makes me feel a little bad, but it was a good scene.
Have you ever known any kid? I know obviously you were a competitive wrestler in jiu-jitsu, but have you known any kids that have gotten in any kind of fights in real life?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've heard about fights at schools and stuff. My school was still a little different than public school. It was really chill and one class, so all the kids were like friendly with each other. So I never saw any real fights. But all my cousins and my friends who go to regular school, they tell me about real fights all the time.
Oh,
Just
really?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
serious real fights?
Just like kids, um, or girls or boys or whatever, getting into arguments and then fighting. I don't know how common it is, but my friends told me that they've seen
Got
quite a
it.
lot.
Got it. And then the other thing I wonder about, first person is great because you have that immediacy of experience. But again, it makes me wonder, is Jane exaggerating things or not? And so I guess how honest and accurate do you think Jane's account is of her own experience? Do you think we're supposed to trust her 100% or we should trust her? Or is there any evidence we shouldn't trust her perception of events?
I didn't really think about that. I feel like there's no evidence to say we shouldn't, but I also learned about unreliable narrators recently, so you never know. But I feel like um, I don't really know what she would lie about per se. I was a little confused. I didn't really understand the sickness that she got in the red room or
Mhm.
after the fight. So maybe she could be exaggerating a little bit. She is 10 years old, but not too much, I wouldn't say.
And when you say she's 10 years old, is your expectation that younger children are more likely to exaggerate than older people? That is, you're kind of throwing 10-year-olds under the bus there a little bit?
Um, I don't know. I know some pretty capable 10-year-olds actually, but I guess I was thinking that maybe they would exaggerate a little bit, but that's relative because adults can exaggerate too, based on
Yeah,
their motives. So I don't know.
it's totally true. The one signal to me that she might not be a completely reliable narrator, we honestly don't know, is the discrepancy between, I forget the nanny's, the woman who takes care of her, Bessie, is it Bessie?
Yes.
Bessie seems surprised. Jane thinks Bessie is mean to her all the time, whereas Bessie seems surprised by that. Do you think that Jane is right or Bessie is right, or maybe the truth's somewhere in between? Or how do you explain the discrepancy between Jane and Bessie's perception of what's going on there?
I think that's a good point. Jane is feels very lonely and feels like everyone is being mean to her. But from what I noticed, I thought that Bessie was the kindest to her out of everybody in the household. So maybe there was just some extra angst or something, but um, from her perspective, it could be like that.
Her perspective, Jane's.
Yes.
Um, do you think, and I'm going to sort of potentially throw Jane under the bus, do you think some people are kind of dramatic or melodramatic about their own experience, that they sort of exaggerate things?
For sure, yeah. I think so.
Is there any chance that maybe Jane has a bit of a victimhood narrative going on with the whole household thing?
Possibly, yes.
And
Yeah,
clearly her stepbrother is a jerk. If I guess
yeah.
my assessment is with Bessie, maybe she's not completely fair to Bessie. With her stepbrother, do you remember his name?
Oh, shoot. Oh, John Reed, I think.
Yeah, he's a total. I mean, I'm convinced he's a jerk. And
Yeah. So,
well, actually, the stepmom relationship is interesting. What do you make of the last conversation that Jane and her stepmom have? How do you take that?
um, overall, I think she's pretty dismissive of Jane and like kind of puts her down. And I know that um, Jane's dad was the stepmom's brother or something, and he made her promise to take care of Jane like a child, and she has been feeding her and housing her, but she's not necessarily treating her like her own child,
Mhm.
which is an important distinction, I think. So I
You
think
know,
that she sees her more as a burden instead of an actual kid. So I feel like she is mean and dismissive and um, more worried about her own children and will maybe exaggerate things that Jane does.
mhm.
Um,
Um, no, fair enough. One thing that comes up for me is, step families can be hard. I mean, there's a case to be made. I mean, there's certainly natural parents that are perhaps not great parents to their own kids. But there's also a long thing in literature and I think in real life where, and again, there's step parents who can be wonderful step parents, but I think they're also, certainly in literature, but again, I think in real life, cases where step parents are not quite as close and caring as real parents.
yeah.
What's your take on that? Do you think the step parent thing is problematic, or do you have no idea?
Do you mean problematic in general?
Yeah, I mean, clearly here it's problematic, but do you think it might be harder? Do you think there's more of a risk that if it's not your own child and you're raising somebody else's child? I know clearly adopted families sometimes work out beautifully. I don't know. How much weight do you put on the step parent aspect of this?
I mean, it really depends on the step parent, but also I feel like in most real cases, the mother or father of the stepchild is still alive. So there's like, oh, maybe one someone loves that person and then so is obligated to take care of the kid. But in this case, it's just the kid and it's her brother, and we don't know the relationship between them. So
Hmm.
that's a difference. But I feel like most stories I hear, it turns out okay, for the kid. And since the step parent loves the other parent or wants to be in a relationship with them, they've got to accept it. And then most of the time, I don't know about most of the time, but I hear about cases where it turns out great and the step parent is awesome. And I know there's other cases where it isn't. But I think the biggest difference here is that there is no other parent. So it's just a different situation.
Yeah, she's an orphan, as by the way was Oliver Twist. So in both
Yes,
cases,
that's
sort
true.
of orphaned. One other dynamic I want to check in on is sometimes when kids misbehave, I guess it's an open question. When kids misbehave, is it the kid's fault or is there a problem in the family dynamic? And so one interpretation, and this is her stepmom's interpretation, is Jane is a bratty kid. Let's get rid of the bratty kid. Send her off to school. Glad to be rid of her. Of course, from Jane's side, it's an unfair family dynamic. And so insofar as she might act out a little bit, um, you know, it's Jane's right to act out because she's not being treated fairly. Do you think that it's a common or a familiar dynamic that sometimes, say, a kid acts out, but in fact, it's not the kid's fault if they're acting out? Have you ever heard about or seen situations like that?
I think that can definitely be true. I think sometimes the way or the environment the child grew up in, like maybe promoted that kind of behavior.
Hmm.
In this case, the stepmom was always, or most likely was always really, uh, ig maybe ignored her or didn't treat her the same. So Jane always felt cast aside and she was always kind of angry and maybe that made her bratty
Hmm.
or yeah, bratty in the mom's eyes. And then in her eyes, she's just defying a little bit and being mad and lonely.
Hmm.
So I think it's, especially at that age, I think it's more of the environment than the
Hmm.
kid just deciding to be bratty.
Well, one thing I'm aware of is even in natural families, again, I expect that your parents are superb about loving and respecting both of you equally. But I've seen even in natural families where one kid gets more attention than the others, and a kid who gets less attention sometimes, acts out a little bit. Does that make sense as to why simply one kid getting more attention could lead another kid to be resentful and kind of do things?
Absolutely. And this isn't like, or it's not a very big case because the families I am surrounded with tend to be great. But I've seen things like that happen in like, just for example, jujitsu circles. Like the oldest child will be like, oh, or they'll travel to all the competitions and get all the privates and all the good classes, and the younger sibling tends to get ignored because the older sibling is doing very well in jujitsu or whatever their sport. And I don't know if that always makes them act out, but usually they get like neglected a little bit, which isn't great.
Yeah. No,
I feel like if you have,
I'm very much of the camp that I think reading novels helps one understand the world, the psychology of human beings better. Does that seem fair that even just thinking about Jane's behavior and the dynamic in a way gives us additional insight into human beings a little bit?
yeah, absolutely, because it's told by lots of different people.
Yeah. Um, One other thing I want to check up on, and then I'll let you go for the day, is, with Jane Austen, obviously class, who gets to, marry up versus fall into the bottom. Oliver Twist, parents die, he's stuck in the bottom. Oh, it turns out, he inherits and everything turns out okay. Any thoughts on this version of, and again, it would seem from these authors that sort of an obsession with class status is a high stakes and real issue. Any particular spins on this version in Jane Eyre after reading both Jane Austen and Dickens? Seem similar, different? What's your take?
I feel like right now it could be a mix of both. Like maybe there's like the class thing with Austin involved. Like I remember them saying or talking about Jane's poor relatives versus the stepmother's relative wealth.
Mhm.
And then mixed with the fact that she's an orphan and has no parents and is going off to a new place. So I think it could be similar to both, but as for the outcome, I don't really know. I have
Got
to
it.
read more.
Well, I would say this is actually a good reason to have read Jane Austen first and then Dickens next, is you have some comparisons in terms of, well, with Dickens, you saw dramatically how bad it can get. And then with Jane Austen, things turned out fine in the end with her two protagonists. Cool. Anything else for now?
No, that's it.
All right. Have a wonderful time in Hawaii. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. See you soon.
Welcome.